Also, a couple cool things from the Game Awards, Baldur's Gate related, is that their CEO, he has a full set of plate armor that he wears to shows like this. He has to ship it separately in like a crate. The shipment was delayed and stuff, and people were freaking out. They're like, "Oh no, Sven's not going to have his armor." The community calls it his +5 charisma armor, which is true because like you see him in the crowd. Like, there's one dude wearing plate armor.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 445 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the not programmer.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is December 8th, 20 Jubilee. Before we get started, we have a warning. It's going to be a couple of swear words in this show. See if you can spot them. It's like, where's Waldo? Or, where are they?
Where the fuck is Waldo?
It could be anywhere.
You could try a harder game might be seeing where you can not spot them. You know?
Yeah.
Where aren't they?
A forest for the trees, sort of.
Can you find a sentence in this episode that doesn't have a swear word in it?
Oh, no,
it's
you
tough.
just made one.
It's a tough one.
You made it too easy.
It's tough. Also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thanks for letting us grab your money. Okay, we got some stuff to talk about.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. First of all, the Game Awards happened yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
As we all both hoped and expected, Baldur's Gate 3 did pretty well for itself.
Yeah, I'm cleaned up.
As it should have.
I don't know if it won all of the awards because I didn't actually, watch all of it, but I'm just going to assume it did.
I read the full list of awards this morning because I also didn't watch the show, and it was the most boring list possible because it was like, hey, here's a whole bunch of franchises that have been around for 20 years that turn out something new every 1 to 4 years.
Remember those games you played in the early 90s?
Yeah,
They're still around.
Here's the 20th one. So very boring, but it was I think the least boring part of it was the fact that this new D&D based RPG that really felt like it should have been a niche kind of a thing. We already knew that it kind of just took over and actually it won people's hearts and minds,
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice to see at least that bit of reality reflected in the Game Awards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the only other part that was, is always a little annoying is that like the Game Awards is mainly for promotional purposes for new games. You know? So the actual awarding part, they were like a little more egregious about not giving people time during the giving of awards. So like,
they got to get those ads in. I mean,
yeah. So that felt a little more dumb than
a little rushed.
Normal. A little rushed.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm glad Baldur's Gate swept as it should have, and similarly was kind of bored by a lot of the nominations. But is what it is. There's only like 30,000 games coming out.
Mm-hmm.
It's.
I mean, the fact that there is a best indie game, right? Like, there's best indie game, and there's like best mobile game, which is even actually wilder because almost all those are also indie, but there's fuckloads of them, right? As we like the last time we had numbers on it, which was a long time ago now, there were like 5,000 games come out a week on mobile, right? So this is the thing that I wanted to talk about awards in general, which is what exactly are they and why they don't mean anything? Because in our earlier days, it was we tried to submit our games, Crashlands in particular, to all of the awards things that we could, and we actually got some decent, and we still do, yeah, and we actually got some decent recognition. But it was one of those things where like we always felt like the recognition though was like actually meaningful, right? In the earlier days where we felt like if we got recognition, then that was good and confirmed that we were doing something really well. And if we didn't get it, then that was bad. And that implied that maybe we weren't doing something really well.
Because think about it this way. If you're a judge at the Oscars and there's like 50 movies that you need to consider, you can watch all of them.
Yeah.
It'll take you a while.
I bet you anything they don't do it.
They don't. And also like they can kind of watch them throughout the year as they're coming out, whatever. So they might, watch some to kind of catch up and try to make decisions because they have to judge things, right? What the fuck do you do if you are judging the Game Awards and one of the games is Baldur's Gate, which takes 100 hours, and which would be one game would take the same amount of time as every movie in the Oscars, right?
Well, actually,
which means that like the judges can't actually they can't play everything, right?
Yeah. And that's sort of the thing where I think to Adam's point, the times where you submit for, a festival or an award or whatever else, and you're not selected, the problem is that it's simply not the case that being not selected is essentially a negative thing, if that makes sense. Like it doesn't necessarily mean anything because there's actually so much happening in terms of the structural like setup of any particular award or festival that you are essentially trying to interact with that structure.
Yeah.
And whether that means, we found out like one of the awards that Crashlands was up for, we found out that the judges that day got all of the possible games downloaded onto a device.
I think it was,
they just had
100.
They had a collection of
games.
iPads in a room and all the judges came in. I think it was like 2 hours before they had to make a decision.
Yes.
Right?
And
they had about 2 minutes per game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And like that was for the original Crashlands, which
which is a long form game.
Yeah, it's a 60-hour RPG. The first 2 minutes, you basically just managed to crash.
It's a little bit of tutorial, right? Yeah, that's the whole
So-
thing. But the other thing was too is that there was at least one judge in that group who actually had played Crashlands and knew about it.
Yes.
Right. And that person that we know would have been advocating for us. Would have been making a case, right? Because that's the other thing too. Is like this is like a jury, right? Where like it's not about the truth, right? It's about what you actually saw, which is some fraction of reality, right? How it was interpreted, which is not really necessarily connected to reality, and then basically the politics of people arguing about stuff, right? And so that's
or even the politics of like I was looking at the list and it's like Baldur's Gate to me. For everything it was nominated in, it kind of just, to me, it wins across the board. Like it didn't win Best Narrative, which is wild to me. And I get that like Alan Wake is cool as shit. I get it. But like it didn't win Best Narrative, which
that's because Baldur's Gate has so many narratives,
But this also,
but one of those narratives must be the best.
That's what I'm getting at. It's like you can't, because again, the politicking thing. It's
they're not actually, they're not comparable. You can't compare
Yeah.
Alan Wake's narrative to Baldur's Gate.
Well, but it's also the point that like if Alan Wake didn't win that, then and also didn't win the Game of the Year, then it wouldn't necessarily win anything.
Yeah,
so
and they
you got
needed
do
to
this
give
whole
it to
like
Alan
little,
Wake. Yeah, because
it was great. Yeah, it was good. But
not just because it's good, but also because all of these events need to support themselves into the future, right? And their money comes from advertising, right? That's where large companies give them fuckloads of cash to have their logos appear on things and all this kind of stuff, right? And of course, those same large companies are the ones producing the games that show up in the awards and all this kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and this isn't like tinfoil hat stuff either, right? Because this is just literally how it works. It's just it's just how it works.
Yeah.
And they're just like with anything else, there are going to be people who are doing their best to like accurately pick what they really think is the best game. There's going to be people who are trying to ensure the future of that, whatever that award is, right? And trying to pick based on the money kind of situation. And a lot of the fights and decisions are going to be going along those lines. In the same way that when you watch like a reality TV show, behind the scenes, the producers are trying to figure out who to make look bad and who to make look good.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of stuff. And which is the main thing I wanted to have as a takeaway is just like, it's a good time to talk about the fact that awards are really disconnected from the truth about the quality of a game, how it was received, and that kind of thing. And even if it wasn't, you can't compare games to each other unless they're basically clones, right? Like it's not the whole apples and oranges thing. Like
not only that,
you can't.
And we've had a lot of events too, where like in the past we've gone to conventions or conferences, and shown our game or submitted our game to awards at that convention. And in some other cases, there would be games that show really well on a convention floor. Typically like same screen co-op sort of controller games that are more action heavy that you can kind of just jump right into.
It was like rowdy as hell on a convention.
Yeah, because like they can attract a crowd, and like if you're at the convention with a friend or multiple friends, then you can all play the game together, and you're making lots of noise, and it's like clearly people are having a great time with it. Versus if you sit down to play a more like story focused single player game, you're putting on headphones, and you're just like quietly enjoying, right? And so when judges from the convention walk around to see, like what games are people really into? What's looking really fun and interesting? They're always going to gravitate toward the couch co-op action games in these conventions. But then those games really struggle in the actual market because couch co-op action games, you
need a couch.
It's sort of the inverse of a convention floor, right? You're not there with friends.
When you're at your house by yourself, it's the opposite. Yeah, so that's like, another thing.
It's like with it when you're dealing with, because it's kind of a general data problem, right? It's like if you see a data point in a vacuum, you need the full context of how that data was generated to be able to interpret it, right? And it's the same deal with an award. So like when you see a frankly absurdist label like best indie game, right?
Best mobile game.
You gotta imagine there's like an asterisk there, right? And then underneath you would say like, according to a panel of nameless judges with unknown incentives who looked at an unknown fraction of the games that could have been considered for this award, right?
And each game they looked at for 7 minutes.
Yeah, and in a noisy, rushed context using a form factor that may or may not have been appropriate for the game, et cetera, right? Like that's
it starts to lose its luster.
Well, what I get at here though is actually that I don't think it necessarily loses its luster. I think it's just one of those things where it's like, because here's the thing, it still is useful one to have awards in your belt because they allow you to
because it's part of the game that you're playing.
It's part of the game, right?
When you're trying to sell games, awards do things that can help you, right?
Yeah,
but the part you have to understand is that it's still a game though that you're playing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing. It's not that it's meaningless. It's just that it has its own structure that you are talking to in order to get those awards, right? And so it's still is a big honor if you win one of these things. Yeah, of course, to be nominated, amazing. But the reality then too of being nominated or not is just that you have to recognize that it's not just the game that is being contended with in that context. It's a bajillion.
I would think about it like a COVID test, which I'm thinking about because I'm thinking about COVID lately. When you take a COVID test, if it shows up positive, it's very, very likely
you almost
you're positive.
Have COVID.
If it shows up negative,
you just don't know.
You may or may not have COVID. Right? So like if you win an award in one of these shows, you probably have something real good on your hands in some way.
Yeah,
that is not necessarily literally the best because again, that's a meaningless concept there because it's something you can't possibly just.
It's a useful concept, I would say.
Right,
but not true.
But if you don't win an award, who the fuck knows what that means?
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the thing we had to kind of learn early on was that was disappointing when like it was awesome to be nominated and we were like looking at our competition, we'd be like, actually, we think like we might be able to get on top of this list, Mm-hmm. And then most of the time to not. I actually think always to not. We never got to the top of any list. I think we were always
runner up, baby.
We got so many runner ups.
Yeah. Which is again like a really solid
impressive
acknowledgement of the thing that we did actually, right? But it was still hard not to be like, but that means we didn't have the best game. It's like, that's not what that means. That isn't what that means, right? It means we had a really good game, probably, compared to the other ones that people were thinking about and looking at, which is part of what makes it good because people were thinking about it and looking at it, right? But let's kind of.
And sometimes we got second place to games that did not do well in the market, and then other times we got second place to Pokemon Go, which did okay for itself.
I heard
that.
That was the one scenario where I was.
You were like fair.
I was really because that was which award was that?
Was DICE.
The DICE award.
Yeah, the mobile game of the year for DICE.
Mobile game of the year for DICE.
17, I think.
Yeah, because that one I was surprised that we were in that list.
Me too.
I was surprised we were in there. And then the fact
I personally thought Crashlands was one of the best mobile games, period, right? But it was still surprising to be in that list. And then with the company we were with it
was pretty cool.
Go. I think it was like there's an Angry Birds game too, I think.
I think that was also in that Mario game, I think was also in there. The one where you like just
Super Mario Run.
Super Mario Run or something.
I don't know. Yeah, we saw the list. We were like, clearly we're not going to fucking win that, but thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the nomination.
Yeah, but it was cool just to be nominated on that one, right?
Which again, and also like not being nominated doesn't really mean anything.
No, it doesn't. And being nominated doesn't mean you're literally the best game, right?
Yeah, because I'm pretty confident that out of the whatever 600,000 games that came out in 2016, there were a lot of games better than Crashlands.
Oh yeah,
For a lot of people, and it's like, or for a different context, like games are very different, apples and oranges. But
they're
anyways,
they're not
so Game Awards,
they're non-fungible tokens.
Also, a couple cool things from the Game Awards, Baldur's Gate related, is that their CEO, he has a full set of plate armor that he wears to shows like this. He has to ship it separately in like a crate because it's super fucking heavy.
It probably weighs 60 pounds or something.
Yeah. So he shipped it. He had to ship it to Vegas or wherever the show was, and he was tweeting because there was the shipment was delayed and stuff, and people were freaking out. They're like, "Oh no, Sven's not going to have his armor." The community calls it his +5 charisma armor, which is true because like you see him in the crowd. Like, there's one dude wearing plate armor in the crowd. And they put him on the edge on the aisle, so like you can see him when people are walking down the aisle. He's just there, like happily, like smiling and clapping for everybody.
I wonder if they like also have to for like fire code kinds of reasons and stuff.
Probably,
like there's probably not a part of the fire code that specifically addresses if people are wearing plate armor, but there's because like there's always a fire marshal that like comes to these things and makes sure it's fine, right?
Yep.
And so they probably like saw this guy in plate, but they were like, this guy cannot be in the middle of a row of things. Like he's got to be.
Well, if anything, he should be in the middle because if he's in full plate, he can be the last guy out. Because if a building falls on him, he's got a higher chance. But if the building is on
fire, then he's going to get baked so fast, because like
it's plus charisma, not plus fire resistance.
That's true. He needs to get some asbestos in there,
Yeah.
But then the other kind of cool thing was that as Baldur's Gate 3 was winning the community award for like best community engagement and stuff, community support. As they're winning that award, they released a hotfix patch to fix some bugs.
Yeah, what a move! I gotta say, of all the studios that were listed this year, I think we talk about DevOps, we talk about constant delivery. You take a look at those patch notes from. Even if you don't play Baldur's Gate. Yeah, you don't play Baldur's Gate. Like, I don't care if you play it. Just look at that list because it's like they'll put out a fucking patch after a week or two of the most recent one that has like 200 things in it, and I'm just like. Yes. Yeah,
I put it this way. Like, so I've been playing WoW since 2004, and WoW has a patch that comes out with patch notes about every 6 months or so with like a major patch. And I can read through those patch notes in 5 minutes. Get a pretty good sense of all the things that are changing in just like 5 minutes. And that's what this was with Blizzard taking like 6 months to work on this patch. Right. And Larian will release a patch like in a 3-week window. And I will need to like take 6 naps while reading the patch notes because it's so much shit that they're putting into this game that I just can't get to the end of it. Also there's so much stuff in the patch notes about things in the game that I still have not seen yet, even though I've played for like 400 hours. So I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at.
I think that's to me the most impressive thing about that game is actually this delivery cadence that they're on. The quality of the delivery is just kind of crazy, and there was a few weeks back where they hotfixed something and ended up kind of breaking something else, but it ended up being one of those things that we talk a lot about doing QA and trying to cover all bases and stuff, but also how the more complex a game gets, the harder it is to know really that you didn't break some shit. And they had
you'll be like, I made a surgical change that affects this system, and then you check that system and it's fine, and then it turns out 5 other things that you didn't even realize were related suddenly misbehave. Yeah, it's just
So it was the first time that they put out a patch and like broke some stuff in a kind of a big way, and I was like, oh man, maybe their shit isn't that good. But it turns out the reason was so strange and invisible that like how
essentially you needed to have like 40 hours of gameplay in the game after this change came out before you would start to see the bugs that it created. And it's like, there's no way that their QA would have like installed the patch, started a new save, and then just played for 40 hours in one save. Like,
which is like, they don't have enough time. I think like literally
there's not enough time.
Goes so fast. I don't even know.
Well, this is one of those reasons why for games in particular, because of how they're experienced, which is in these really dynamic, combinatorially complex ways, especially games that are open world, right? Where the state, like the full state of the game, all the value of all the variables and so on, right? Between any 2 players at any point in time, is just basically random. Like they're just completely disconnected, right? Is that you can't test that. It's literally not possible. You cannot QA
The whole
every
play space.
possible situation that a player could find themselves into. It's time impossible. There's no way. So this is where you have to be. This is where your processes have to be really good, and where your focus has to be on. It's called shift left, right? As in, if you're thinking of a workflow moving from left to right, you make sure that the work that you're doing on the left side of that generates the bugs is just as unlikely as possible to generate bugs in the first place, because your ability to catch them keeps going down over time,
Yes.
right? And we're already dealing with this with Crashlands 2 as a significantly smaller game than
Yeah.
You know,
the first
Baldur's
zone,
Gate.
I think it's like probably between, depending on the player, a 12, 20 hour thing, you know, it's like 50 to 100% larger than the first game's kind of first zone. And just, in that space, you know, we've tried to shift everything to the left now, where even on the narrative side, you know, Jen's working on quests or whatever else, and she has to go play them and test them, you know, physically herself before sending them downstream before QA. So you at least, like, if you do something, you got to go be like, do that little bit of testing and be like, does this actually do what I thought it would do? Even on the art side, it's the same now with the Game Changer, where you don't just make stuff and send it to someone else to put in. You make it, you put it in, you check it, run into it with Flux's body, see if you hit it correctly. Like, because the just sheer amount of like chaos coming out of this thing as the hours go further in gameplay just is too much.
And it's a control thing, which is like if you just make a change and just send it to QA, flip a coin. It may work, it may not work, right? If it doesn't work, it will come back to you. And now you have to stop whatever you are now doing and go fix that bug, and then return to what you're doing, which now you have an increased chance of making new bugs in the thing that you're working on, because you had to stop working on it, change context, come back, merge changes in, blah, 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 right? So it's kind of like find the bugs as you produce them, fix them as you produce them, and then QA is there to find stuff that you couldn't find.
Yeah.
Right? Like time-sensitive, time-intensive things.
QA
or
is
weird edge
supposed to
cases,
be like, and I think it's kind of interesting. Like, people treat QA as like, oh, their job is to find and report the issues so that we fix them. Like, it's kind of like the end of the thought, right? But what they actually are is the safety net that reveals production problems, right? Where
They reveal programming failures.
development problems, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, so basically, every time a bug slips through and QA catches it, that's one of those like, oh, this is an opportunity now for on the dev side to figure out like,
is there a hole upstream?
yeah, what is there something about this that I can treat as like a class of problem, right? So I can prevent this kind of thing from happening again. Does this tell me something about what I'm doing? And this is also why when you have games that are under really aggressive crunch, they have really buggy, unstable outcomes, right? Because they don't have the time to like think about what they're doing based on what QA is telling them, right? And
they're producing code and features as fast as possible.
and then QA is overwhelmed, so they're not catching everything anyway. But even if they weren't, it wouldn't matter because dev is not actually keeping up with QA, right? And this is also why you get those hostile relationships, because everybody starts blaming everybody for things being broken, right? And dev gets mad at QA for just reporting things, being like, hey, this is broken, you know, right?
Yeah, because dev is looking at their mandate as we add features to the game. QA keeps preventing us from doing that by sending us all these bugs. It's like, well,
You made them.
Yeah,
hit pause for a second, stop jamming things in, fix because the other problem is if you keep adding features to a buggy game, then the new features typically are built on top of the bugs or work around the bugs.
It gets harder and harder to actually fix anything.
Everything gets contorted as development goes further if you're not doing this right. Try to get it to fit in the place where it's bouncing on top of these three other bugs that are still there and skirting this one, and then producing some of its own. And it's like, oh my God.
And the whole house of cards will collapse in spectacular cyberpunk fashion, you know?
A case study, you know?
Yeah. All right. Now, something else I want to talk about today is Google Gemini.
What about it? What is it?
So we haven't talked too much about AI stuff because things have been just kind of humming along in the AI world, progressing as expected. I think ChatGPT 4 came out in like May or something. It was quite a while ago. It was like 7 or 8 months ago.
I think they've got their 4.5 now, don't they? So the way that they do is they have like
Turbo.
Then they have the turbo release, which is like it's supposed to be the same like quality wise, but is somehow
More optimized. faster.
optimized, and it's also a lot cheaper if you're using their APIs.
Yeah, which is I think it's a pretty good model, which is kind of like prototype the next level of the thing, get it working really well, release it in a limited way to get feedback on it, and then optimize it and make it better while you have a team working on the next generation, right? So that's a pretty good strategy. And one of the things that's kind of become evident is that like OpenAI was first to the post, right? Like they kicked this whole thing off, and everybody else in the tech world just instantly started shitting their pants and was trying to figure out how to catch up. All the big players. Microsoft was like, all right, and they just bought OpenAI basically. It's like, okay, we're caught up. Microsoft is caught up. We're good.
Which
Google's
honestly was
now
the best move because catching up in this kind of a space is very hard to do.
It's very hard, yeah, because of course, like AI is a thing that makes like if you have a good AI, then it should make development of all things easier, which we're seeing with like Copilot that we use all the time now, right? And so it stands to reason that if OpenAI is using their own AI internally to help them develop AI, which I would assume they are, then they're going to be on this kind of like exponential curve that, you know, even if Google, say, was behind by a week, they might as well just be behind by 10 years because they cannot catch up unless they do some kind of a breakthrough.
Is actually the training data. More so because AI is one of those weird things where like it doesn't really the stuff that these AI models are really good at is stuff that's statistically likely. In fact, that's what it can do. Right. Yeah. So it's actually really bad if you're working at bleeding edges of things because you're doing stuff for the first time. There's not good representation in your data set, right, to make those things for you. But at least when I've read people talking about like what's hard about them competing, right? It's mostly about training sets because you have to be willing to steal first, right? And just ignore copyright law.
Yeah, which if you're Google, no problem.
And then you have to have
next problem.
And then you have to have an incredible scale, like just an absurd scale. And then you have to be willing to exploit people to pay them as little as you can in countries where you can get away with that, right? To have them review that material so you can have some control over the content that's going into your training set. Yeah. And you have to say to be willing and able to do all of these things. And it's extremely expensive. Like,
yeah, it's expensive on all fronts. I mean,
yeah, it's expensive. Yeah. Even when you're using exploitation as one of your core mechanisms of stealing intellectual property and exploiting labor, right? Even when you're doing both of those things, it's still so fucking expensive. And so that's really, I think so like actually I just saw today that Meta/Facebook released their own image model that was trained on all Instagram photos. So
which are already heavily filtered. So who the fuck knows what that's going to
So who knows? But they're just, and of course, since it's from their own platform, they just already have the rights to do that. So they didn't even technically steal it, but I bet you anything, nobody feels good about this who's posting pictures.
Artists in particular are going to be very mad about that.
Yeah.
A lot of artists most artists, who are working digitally nowadays. Like
it's one of their core platforms.
Portfolio space.
And tattoo artists and
so like all these companies, they have no qualms about doing this stuff, and they are doing it, right? But the problem is this like first mover problem where like because OpenAI is ahead, like they released GPT-4 8 months ago, they've been working on the next generation thing this whole time, right? Yeah. So Google has like been trying to present themselves, and also like I kind of feel, in a weird way, I feel bad for Google because they actually released the white paper in 2017 that sort of like kicked off this whole thing about how to construct LLMs and how to train them using neural networks and blah, blah, blah. And like OpenAI like based all their stuff off of Google's initial research. Google was doing a bunch of stuff internally, but they didn't really foresee this like arms race happening.
Yeah, of course.
And suddenly it did. And now Google's scrambling to try to not look like they were kind of caught with their pants down or whatever the saying is. So like Google announced Bard maybe like, well, it was like a couple months after ChatGPT first kind of appeared. Yeah. And everybody was like, well, what the fuck is this? Because, it was like limited in a whole bunch of ways and it was kind of unreliable, or it was like,
It just wasn't as good.
In some ways, it was like it was as good as ChatGPT, and in other ways, it wasn't, right? And it also wasn't really integrated with other Google. It was just very much like a look, we have one too kind of a
that was the
announcement.
vibe.
Which is a lot of the vibe right now for AI in general, I think is
yes.
it's just, hey, we got it. Yeah.
There's OpenAI's stuff, and then everybody else is like, we have that too. We have one at home, you know. And so Google once again came out and they're like, okay, this is the thing. We finally have a powerful AI. So I think it was just yesterday or a couple days ago. They announced Google's Gemini AI, which they did this tech demo. And I was watching the tech demo. I was like, no way.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
No fucking way. Because their framing was that existing AI models have a problem with multimodality, which means interpreting different types of information and communicating using different types of information. So,
image, audio, text.
Right. So if you think about so ChatGPT, for example, has a voice chat option where like on the mobile device.
Brand new, but yeah.
It's pretty new.
It's also cool. Have you guys tried that?
I've tried it. It's very cool. But the problem
snappy.
is it actually is not multimodal.
It's not voice. It's
still text-based. Yeah. So it's like you speak, it captures your audio, turns that into text, feeds that to ChatGPT.
Using one AI model, right? That basically converts. Yeah.
So it feeds it to ChatGPT as a prompt. Then ChatGPT responds as it normally would, and then that text gets sent to
another
voice,
AI model.
a text to voice AI model.
Yeah.
Speaks it and it comes back to you, right?
So
there's all these,
which isn't inherently bad, right? Because this is also how human brain works, right? You don't use the same part of your brain to talk and to read, right?
It's true, but also but the crosstalk is important because what this means is that if it's converting a voiced conversation just into text, you are missing. That's very lossy, right? In the sense that you're not reading intonation the whole time. Right. You know what I mean? Like there's none of that stuff happening. To inform what is being said without being said textually. Right?
And of course, it feels very unnatural because if you're talking to somebody, they can figure out when you're wrapping up a thought based on tone of voice, whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, if it's converting to text, like have you ever had this problem when talking to Siri or whatever, it's like you have to speak like you are reading a paragraph, and then you stop and pause at the end, and then the AI is like, okay, I think you're done now because of silence.
It's the main reason I barely use Google Assistant. I use it for the really easy stuff, like setting alarms and that kind of thing, right? But I was like, because I was looking at because I wanted to use it for Todoist because that's my main to-do app. To be able to say, hey, I don't think. But to be able to get it, to be able to pull it up Todoist in the first place, tell it to add something, and then specify where to add it collectively requires a super specific incantation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to say it, you have to enunciate it very clearly. You have to know that it's listening to you when you start
casting
talking.
a spell. You know what I mean?
You're casting a spell. You got to memorize the fucking spell, right? You can't just, and if you stop because you're trying to remember,
then it takes half of your input.
Yeah, it takes half your input. And now you got a broken to-do entry that you got to go manually fix, which is worse than just having not done that in the first place.
Yeah. So in other words, you can't communicate with this thing naturally using your natural speaking voice. Yes. You have to be very cognizant of I'm talking to an AI who's turning my words into text, and I have to speak in a totally different way, which is very hard for people, and therefore this kind of thing still people will play with it and oh, okay, but then they won't really use it for anything, right?
There's a gap. Yeah.
So what Google is coming out and saying with Gemini is this is a problem. All these other AI models, they claim to be multimodal, but actually they've just sort of duct taped a bunch of different AIs together that are losing a ton of information and blah, blah, blah. So they said, we came up with a whole new concept that we call Gemini, which is multimodal from the ground up, and it's trained on all these different ways of communicating via one model somehow. Yeah. Of course, they just represent this with abstracted pictures, so there's no actual details on how exactly they did that, right? But then they're doing this demo, and in the demo, it's real time. So this dude is he's drawing a picture, and he's like, tell me what you see, Gemini. And he starts drawing, and Gemini in real time is like, I see a squiggly line. And then he keeps going, and then it's I see a bird, and then he puts some water in the background. It's oh, now it's a duck. And then he starts coloring it, and Gemini's it's a blue duck. So it's like Gemini is watching this person and commentating on it in real time, right? So, and then they, you know, Google's like, yep. So this is our multimodal model. It can like see pictures. It can talk to you. It can do all this stuff. It can produce video and audio and images. And it can like they drew a picture of a guitar, you know, and they're like, what kind of music should this make? And then Gemini's like, how about this? And then it just like invents a rock song, you know, again, in real time. So this
is the dream, right?
This is what they showed in their tech demo. So then they revealed kind of like how it's going to roll out, and they said there's 3 versions of this model. There's the Ultra model, which is the most powerful one, right? But you got to like pay for it basically, enterprise level. And then there's like a plus one, which is more like the current ChatGPT plus subscription. Is like it's for everyday users, but who still want to use like a fairly powerful model. So it's kind of scaled down and not quite as capable. And then there's I think they called it like the Nano model or something like that, which is like a local on-device one.
Yeah, because it's basically they scale the model down and make it efficient enough that it can run on your phone. And this was a big promise of the Pixel phones anyways. And part of the reason why, I mean, I got one recently. I switched off as my phone ran up on whatever it's time, whatever, was because they're intent on integrating AI into that device, and which in my mind is mainly just to Adam's point, to solve a bunch of these things that I still find very annoying. That would be great if I could just talk to the damn thing and make it do. Right?
Yeah.
So Nano basically is an offline thing, an offline model that then lives on the device and is supposed to be able to help you with stuff in that context.
Yeah. And then they also revealed a bunch of benchmarks. We're talking about like, oh yeah, our Ultra model, you know, outperforms GPT-4 in all these different metrics, right?
Are those shared metrics? Are those metrics that
there's a bunch of publicly available tests that AI models can like run through.
Again, the thing about benchmarks, though, benchmarks are. I've been seeing this a lot. This is unrelated except for the idea of benchmarks, but in the JavaScript sort of ecosystem, there are all these new competitors to Node.js, which is the server-side version of JavaScript, right? So there's these new competitors. One's called Node, and one's called Dino, and one's called Bun. And they're all new to the scene, and but the main things that they're touting at the beginning were basically like, look at how we compare on all these performance benchmarks against Node, right? But then when you go like talk to the people who understand what's going on in the nuances, they're like, well, yeah, because Node is doing these 100 things that these ones aren't doing. So of course they're fast, right? They're literally not doing most of the
things. They don't have any features.
and so. Which is all to say, anytime you're looking at benchmarks, it's kind of like really hard,
thing, right?
Yeah,
it's just a lens. It may not be.
It's a good indicator, right? It tells you something, but it doesn't tell you definitely that this thing is like actually better, and certainly not across any metrics that are not being described.
Yeah. Yes. So here's the problem. What people kind of figured out now is that, well, for starters, there are a whole shit ton of tests and benchmarks that Gemini actually does not outperform GPT-4 on, which again is 8 months old at this point. They just didn't mention those benchmarks in their presentation.
That's always how benchmarks work. Yep.
On top of that, the Ultra version isn't even available, and they don't actually have a release date for it.
I thought this stuff was coming out in like a week or two, isn't it? Middle of December, isn't it?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
I think it's coming you're getting it on phones. It's coming.
Yeah, but you're not getting the Ultra. The Ultra one is the one that they claimed to be like demoing, and all the benchmarks were based off of, which is the big one, right?
Oh, but no one gets to see it for some.
No one can use it.
Time. Nice, cool.
Yeah, and on top of that, the video they showed was completely fake. None of the model is not capable of any of the things they showed in the video, in the sense that what they actually did was behind the scenes they recorded the video. But then they took snapshots of the video and fed them into the model and gave it a text prompt where they would ask it stuff about the pictures from the video.
Is that for real? Is it like
then they converted
this? Because that's like,
yeah, there's a bunch of articles about where people figured out, and like the Google themselves have said like, yeah, here's how we made this video, thinking people would be like, wow, and some people are like, wait, what the fuck, like. So like,
because there's marketing and then there's lies. We have this discussion a lot on the podcast, right? Like,
that's
the point that it's impossible. It's impossible to successfully market a thing and be fully honest about it, right? Because things are not marketable.
Small lens. It's all lossy.
Yeah, because you're trying to explain something in a way that gets it to the right audience over some constricted media over some short amount of time, and it's non-experiential, right?
Mm-hmm.
So marketing always has to be somewhat removed from the full truth, right?
I refer to it as lossy. You could call it lies if you'd like.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, because I think it's about like how lossy is it? Because it can, once it gets lossy enough, like you're in full on lying territory, right?
I was gonna say, sometimes it actually, you're not doing lossy shit. You are just lying.
Yeah.
Right?
Because again, like,
this
was presented as let's take a look at Gemini.
Yeah, a real-time
Here we
model
go.
that could do that. That's
And I was watching it and I was like, so is this thing somehow intaking webcam footage and like in real time processing it? Because I was like, wow, that's an insane leap in capabilities,
huge.
you know?
Yeah. No, it's Google on the map, you know?
Yeah. And of course, what it was doing is just like ChatGPT can do all these things, which is like you give it a picture, you ask it stuff about the picture, it says stuff about the picture, right? And that's basically what they did with Gemini. So they're catching some flack for that, but also, you know, they're unveiling this thing, basically lying about its capabilities. Its true capabilities are essentially at or around where OpenAI was 8 months ago, right? And they still don't have
to be fair,
a full release date
pretty
for it.
fast catching up. Given
it's doing pretty good.
Like, yeah, you'd want it to be actually caught up, but the fact that they caught up to OpenAI in 8 months, or I guess to where OpenAI was 8 months ago, is an impressive feat because they are way ahead.
I think the problem here, though, is that, to your point, Seth, is that like it's a presentation issue, which is, it's one thing to be like, hey, we're more or less catching up and we're doing this cool thing where we're like downsizing the model and putting it on your phone. That's actually like, I can get excited about that, right? That's cool.
If they had just shown that, I'd be like, nice, I'll check it out.
But as soon as you start doing this weird, like, kind of just lying about shit, it actually makes the whole thing start looking more flimsy where you're like, but.
Well, and it makes you don't know what to expect.
Because basically they're trying to become like first in AI, right?
Yeah.
And their effort, and so instead of just being like, okay, well, we're going to play catch up and do it aggressively, right? Where then they could just be honest the whole time and be like, here's where we're at. We've revealed this thing, and the whole time everybody would be like, they'd be like, we know this isn't good enough yet, and everybody who uses it will be like, yep, it's not good enough yet, right? But if they were doing that, then I would just be like, oh, cool. So I can kind of see how fast they're catching up. And now that's really interesting.
They have touch points where OpenAI does not. Like, again, the idea of just saying like, hey, we're downsizing the model and it's just going to be on Pixel phones is cool as fuck.
Or fucking cool. if it was in Google, if it was in your Google Drive, you know?
Yeah, they debuted that with Bard, but it doesn't like fucking do anything. It doesn't work on almost anything. I was like, hey, what's happening in my calendar next week? It was like, I can't see your calendar. And I was like, what the fuck can you do, Bard? Because I was told you could do some stuff. And it was like,
this is the problem is Google doesn't have to have a better AI than OpenAI. They just have to have one that's hooked into Google stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it was like 10% worse than ChatGPT, whatever the fuck that means.
But it was on your fucking phone.
But it's like hooked in everything. I'd go for it.
Exactly.
If it was GPT-3 level, but
on stuff that you use,
but had access to my information, which, you know, that has its own set of unknowns and issues, of course, right? But in terms of the functionality that I would want, like, I want integration. That's what I want. I have fuckloads of stuff. I have to interact with things. I'm already bought in wholly into the Google ecosystem. So if they could just use it there, you know, but I think Google is so, like, their products are so fucking disconnected, you know, that I think this is like,
that's true.
That I just don't really even see them. It's weird because I don't feel like it's even on their radar to be like, oh yeah, we should be like, what people really would like give us money for, you know, would be.
But they've announced these things. Like when they announced Bard, they showed videos of Bard working through your Google Drive, and
it can do some stuff, but the problem is like, how to put it, the constraints it has are hard enough edge. It's like the talking to AI thing where it's like, if it can't do most things, like 90% of them when you're trying to talk to it, then it becomes so unreliable to ask it to do anything that you just don't. I mean, like literally the thing I wanted
into your process.
Yeah, the thing it's more costly to ask it and then go do it manually.
Exactly. the one thing I've wanted from one of these fucking things is like, especially when Bard came out, I went and tested it because I was like, oh, I can have it. Look at this email I just got. That is one of my family members sending me a flight reservation. And just make me some Google Calendar events for their arrival here. Like that's a very annoying thing to like go. You gotta go dig into this airplane thing.
Although Gmail actually already has that.
Only kind of, at least so far as I've experienced. I don't know. Maybe I'm not.
It's generally worked for me, but I don't know if there's also like airline specificity. It's also a thing you do have to enable.
Okay, maybe there's a thing I'm missing already. But like I asked Bart to do it because I was like, you can read this. You know how to, and you're supposed to be able to interact with my stuff. And it was like, I can't read your email. And I was like, okay.
It's like, come on, Bart. We all know you've already read all of my emails.
Yeah, exactly.
You were born from my emails.
Yeah, Bart. So then I copied the text of it and I just pasted it in. I was like, all right, can you make me a calendar event? And it's like, I can't use your calendar. And I was like, what? I was told you could do stuff with my stuff. And it was like, I can read your Google Docs. And I was like, that. Honestly, about the most useless thing that I could do. Like, get it together, man.
Having worked with, this is an interesting technical process. So authentication is one of the fucking most annoying and hardest problems in tech, especially web tech, because everything has to go through an authentication layer so you can talk to the internet, right?
It's like how you know how you have to do 2-factor authentication every time you want to do something. Your poor web applications are just doing that also themselves all the time.
Yeah.
Okay?
And so there's this approach. So basically, because Google actually just has a whole bunch of independent products that they kind of jam together. And Microsoft is the same deal, right? Yeah. Like Microsoft, though, because they have a cobbled together like login thing where they basically like behind the scenes what actually happens when you log into something is that you start where you're trying to go and then it takes you to some other place and then like, and then it's called a token exchange, right? Where it basically like completes one authentication. It's like, oh, I'm not there yet. Goes to another thing, uses the thing that it just did to complete the next authentication, right? And I know this because I have to do it for Xbox sign-ins in Rumpus. And I have to literally do 3 token exchanges when you try to sign in to get to your fucking Xbox information. Right? And Google, at least, like that's a little bit better, but it's still the same deal where it's like they have all these products that are all kind of stuck together and they don't talk to each other. They don't live in the same servers, right? They don't have the same like ways of talking to them. They're actually completely, fully separate entities, right? And when you're trying to talk to them, you have to separately like manage authentication into each one to actually be able to do it. And that's for some good reasons. Like you don't want to just give blanket permissions to everything because you want something to have permission for one thing, right? Like that makes sense.
Also, when you're building stuff, you don't want to have to keep in mind how, I don't know, the infrastructure of something else that was built 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a lot of reasons why this makes sense, right? But it makes something like this where you're then saying like, okay, I want something that does have access to the right information, right? And can get all of it and can use it and kind of like mix it all together somehow. It makes that extremely challenging. But again, on the other hand, it's fucking Google. They have literally 100,000 engineers.
My take on this is, again, to your point, it's just weird because it's like, again, a kind of bad ChatGPT, but that was in my stuff would be fucking amazing.
Yeah.
So just give me that, Google. You can go laterally. We don't need to
also knowing that it'll improve over time.
Yeah, it's fine.
Like I would play with it, and like Notion has this, and they're kind of rolling this out, which is Notion, right? Like up until now, they've had this like sort of completion based AI where you can ask it to write stuff for you or summarize things or, like look at specific documents. But for example, like what we use Notion for in our organization is vast accumulation of documentation.
Yeah. Post
whatever it is we got going on in the studio,
whatever.
Yeah. Put quarterly reviews, postmortems, game ideas, story Bibles,
Project
whatever.
Sheets, whatever. Yep.
Yeah. So it's all there in Notion. And sometimes you'll be like, oh, I want to find this thing. And you'll do a search and you're like, no, I don't, maybe I'll try this.
You start kind of like, it's the keyword based search problem, right? Which is if you have to already, it's like, so when I make a Notion document, I'll often add a thing at the top that just says keywords and then just some words that I know
just a bunch of words
trying to use to find it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause if somebody knows what they're searching for, like if they know about the thing, but they don't know the exact language used in the thing or like, let's say I wanted to figure out something about our deployment pipeline, well, we call it the game pipe, but if you didn't know that term,
or if you thought there was a space between game and pipe,
or maybe you just misspelled it or whatever, right? Then, how do you find it? Well, you just start digging, right? Well, so Notion is adding in basically a crawler AI that like, you can just ask it stuff. You could be like, oh, can you summarize how our deployment pipeline works? And it'd be like, sure. And then it'll look through all of your Notion stuff in your workspace.
Which actually brings us back to the permissions problem again, right? Which is, how do they handle the fact? Because like let's say our quarterly review discussions, right? We have in a sort of a private subsection of our Notion that the three of us have access to, because we want to make sure that employees don't see each other's stuff, right? We don't like do weird stuff and say weird things.
We're not talking shit about people,
but we don't want employees to have like their personal information revealed to each other, right? So we keep that stuff, separated out, and that's true for all kinds of stuff because we also follow the principle of least privilege, which is if somebody doesn't need access to something, they just shouldn't have it because all access creates risk, right? So if I go and make a search now, as an admin, like,
does it only search things that you can see? Or
does it only search things that I can see? Because if it only searches things that I can see, does that mean, because now if you imagine like on the other side of that, if you're Notion trying to build a way to model this stuff, right? Then you have to make sure that your model can take into account permissions, right?
It would have to, from the jump. It would be like, give me all the pages that this person can actually see. And then
so you have to basically create like an on the fly kind of like mini model, right?
Yeah.
And like, so I don't
it's
envy.
a big challenge.
Yeah. And this is like with information problems is that access is just it's like access and how the data then exists once you like get it, right? Like those two parts of the problem are why integration with AI things, really anything, is just so fucking hard.
Yeah. But we're getting there. But, come on, Google. Just be honest. What is this? What is this shit? Just tell us what you got. Tell us what you've got, and we'll use it if it's good. If it's not, we won't.
And again,
it's okay to have a worse thing.
But also, it always feels to me like it's the classic business problem, which is that competing head to head it has never been a good idea. It's never been a good strategy. So I'm just always confused when you see an entity that has so many options available. This isn't like a startup that can only do AI. This is like they already got so many things. Then competing on benchmarks. I don't care about benchmarks. Yeah. Can it read my emails? Can it touch my calendar? ChatGPT still can't. Like, or I guess you have to do a bunch of plugins and stuff like through a separate. Like it's a whole other thing.
Yeah, Google needs to pull a Nintendo Switch. They need to be like, okay, Xbox and PlayStation. You're like, yeah, but we have 37 FPS at 4K. Switch is over here like, yeah, but ours you could take it on an airplane.
Yeah, can you do that?
Which is just a whole
no amount of FPS will get you on a fucking airplane, Xbox.
Yeah, no matter how strong the Xbox is, it doesn't have that feature, right? Yeah. It's like Google needs to just do that, and they'll be fine. So, anyways, that's all the time we have for this. We actually are recording the next episode immediately after this, go. So we'll just roll right into it. So. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost the game in the discovery section of Steam, and it helps us get that exposure, so we'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.